let's keep moving so that I can get you out of here at a decent hour. So a lot of good questions happening, and if somebody's come up with something, I've been trying to share it out if it's something that sort of everyone would be useful to know. But a lot of this, I mean, as hopefully you know, with a lot of technology, most of it boils down to just playing around with it a lot and just getting comfortable with the workflow, figuring out what works for you, figuring out what doesn't work. Every program is going to have its own little quirks. I've been trying to point out things that I've discovered that the program doesn't do that I kind of wish it would along the way, but you will probably discover other things. I mean, no matter how detailed a program gets, you can be working with the most advanced video editing software in the world, and the first client in is going to ask you to do the one thing that that software can't do. It's a variation of Murphy's Law, I guess. I don't know. But any case, let's get through the last two sections of this. These will definitely go quicker. We'll talk a little bit about the homework for next week and kind of go on from there. So next thing up is sound. Let me get rid of this. So sound, we already talked about the little sounds that happen with the effects. And those are just, as Christine discovered, just quick little one shot. As the thing is swooping in, there's a whoosh or a ding or a chirp or something like that. So those are just meant to, the reason you would use that from a design standpoint is that it supports aurally the appearance of something visually. It just gives multiple modes of cueing that something has happened. But you also want to ask yourself, especially if there's other audio happening, is it going to be too distracting? We saw I think it was the video of the bus at the airport,
Australia,
where there was the ahs and the yays, and sometimes they worked okay, the sounds worked okay, and other times they just seemed distracting. So sometimes those little interjected noises can help, and others not. So, but the sound we're talking about is sort of sounds for the entire project or for a slide. And the way Powtoon works is it separates those two things out. So you can have a sound track or a sound file that will play for your entire slideshow. And if the music you're using or the sound you're using is shorter than your slideshow, it'll just loop the sound as many times as it needs to. I think that's the way PowerPoint works when you add in a soundtrack to PowerPoint. But you can then also have a separate soundtrack that only operates per slide. And that really is geared towards the whole idea of voiceovers and getting voices on top of this. So all of the sound things are accessed in terms of your control panel from the little speaker icon that's parked down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So when that pops up, if there's nothing in there, you've got two layers for the entire Powtoon. One they consider a voiceover, one is music, and then there's a separate track for just for the slide voiceover. If you happen to have a movie in your slide right now, you will see an additional little on-off switch underneath that is for the audio for that movie, if the movie has a sound to it. So you can drag in something that's got a soundtrack, but then turn it off if you want to have your own music playing over it. So that would be the one additional thing that might show up down here. But basically, it's these three. So for the entire Powtoon for adding music, you can also get to this by clicking on the sound category over here. And it's kind of like everything else. They give you a couple of categories. There's free sounds and there's premium sounds. 10,000 tracks and more to choose from. So because there's so many, they do give you a little bit of a search engine tool. So you can search by a word, but a lot of times the names of the sound files aren't going to really relate to a search word. So they also give you a few moods: happy, chill, edgy, holidays, dramatic, unicorn. I've got to click on unicorn. That looks like it's sort of party music. I've got global celebration, sailor's hornpipe, lost connection, tres gringos, alt, maybe alternative, sure thing, All right, I've got to go with the sailor's hornpipe here. So when I find something I like, you can preview audition them by clicking on the little. Oh yeah, I'm in the mood now. Cheesy synthesizers. Anyway, so I click use. So now in my sound control panel, that object has been dropped in. Since we don't have a physical object to look at for the sound, they put it here. You have a few controls available. You can audition it here by clicking on that. You have a volume control, very important as we discovered last week for soundtracks to really knock that thing down so it's not getting in the way. And you can get rid of it by hitting the trash can, or you can swap it out with a different sound by hitting the little swap out thing. You don't really have any control over the sound itself. You can't say only play these 15 seconds of this sound file. It will start at the beginning and it will keep looping that thing until your project is done. And that's really all it can do. It will put in a fade out 1 second before the end of your video. It will fade the music out, so at least it'll have a bit of a finish to it. But that's kind of it. I mean, so if you're just wanting to add a soundtrack to your whole thing, which one is that?
Oh, sorry. Get your point across. It's under chill.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Getting the point across.
Well, we have 10,000 soundtracks to choose from here, so there's going to be something there for everybody.
So it's all like non-copy.
This is all public domain. That's why most of the instrumentation is really cheesy MIDI synthesizer sounding things, because they did not hire real musicians to come in and play this stuff. There are whole libraries of royalty-free music. If you've ever used like iMovie, like their library of jingles, that's all royalty-free stuff that you're allowed to use, for whatever projects. All right, so that's that. I will point out, the first thing I want to point out about the voiceovers is just because they call it a voiceover, it doesn't have to be voice. There is no difference to this program whether there's music playing or a person talking and music playing in the same file, or the sound of a truck going by, or anything. It's just sounds. They just give these as kind of suggestions and ways for people to organize, oh, I should put a voice on this. So if you want to have music play only during one slide, there's no reason you can't make that the voiceover for that slide. Just pointing that out because they use this terminology and then people think they can only do one thing in one of them. In terms of the voiceovers, the difference here is you can, if you click, I'm going to click on the entire Powtoon voiceover, is you get some options. You can record, which means right in the moment you can talk to your computer and it will record you. You can upload, so if you've used a program like Audacity or you have another song file you want to bring into the program, you can do it that way. Voice Bunny and Fiverr, those are, I want to pay somebody money to voice over my video. They are, you have to pay, they're for money services. But basically what you do is there are places where you'll see all these people listed. It's like a marketplace for voice talent. And each person will say like, hi, I will use my mature female voice to voice over your project for you. And then what you do if you want to use them is you submit your text to them. They will record the voiceover and send it back to you as an audio file. I have never done that myself, but that's what those two things are. You can also if you've got files saved in either Dropbox or in Google, you can access those directly and grab files from there. It will only accept these three formats of audio. If you're not sure what they are, MP3 is a compressed form of audio. That's what most people are familiar with. AACs, if you're using Apple iTunes, the files that you get as uncompressed audio files there are AAC files. That is generally an uncompressed audio file, but they can be compressed. And OGG, I can't remember the last time I actually came across an OGG file. I'm not even sure why they still put that in there, but that is another audio file format. But I've never used it myself, and I've been an audio engineer for several decades. So why they picked those three out of all the ones out there, I would have thought they would have put a WAV file in there because for PC users for years that was the standard for PC. But as long as your file is in one of those formats, you can upload it, and it will then drop that into the voiceover track. And the same thing, it's the exact same interface for the current slide. The only difference is if you're doing a voiceover, if you're recording it for a current slide, it's limited to 20 seconds long because slides are limited to 20 seconds long. So if you're recording, it will automatically shut you down at 20 seconds. The recording interface is very straightforward. This pops up. This computer, well, I'm not sure if this will work because right now another program is also recording my microphone, so I don't know if it's taken control. It tells you slide recording is limited to 20 seconds. Right here, you could just change your decision about, you got me. You can even change your choice here, whether you want to do entire Powtoon or current slide. You hit start record, it'll give you a 3-second countdown, and then a little microphone icon will turn on, and then you just start talking, and when you're done, you hit stop. You can listen to it once you've recorded it to make sure it's to your liking. And if you like it, then you hit save, and it will then put that into that slide or into the whole Powtoon if that's what you chose. It will also, when you've done that, in your sound category, where it says My Voiceovers, those will be added to your My Voiceovers. It will ask you to name it too, so you can give it a descriptive name. So these are actually voiceovers that I've done in the past, that it's from other Powtoon projects, that it's just added to my library of voiceovers. Same thing with my music. If I upload any music files, they would show up here as well. I haven't done that, so there's nothing there.
Have you seen the little black box again pop up on the upper right?
The black box.
Oh, when you go to the.
When you're gonna, the one where you said you could record.
Oh, so yeah, when you click on the add voiceover, and then you say record. So speaker icon, that brings up your control panel. Then I click on one of the add voiceover options, and then I say record.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm not in Chrome. Okay.
Oh yeah, it will only work in Chrome or Firefox. That's the only two browsers that Powtoon will accept for this. Again, that's one of those things where Chrome was just a little bit better at implementing having your browser take over your computer for you, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. But that's why a lot of these programs that need to use your computer, they'll say use Chrome, because Chrome kind of has built-in more solid functionality in terms of I need to pipe music. From music standpoint, whenever we use MIDI, if we have to plug a synthesizer into a computer, they always say use Chrome because the MIDI channel is a lot easier to implement. Now, the one thing I do want to talk just a little bit about is the difference between entire Powtoon and current slide, because this will be a decision you'll probably have to make at some point. In both cases, in terms of a workflow, if you're going to have a voiceover, I would suggest recording the voiceover first. It is a lot easier to synchronize the visuals on the screen to the voiceover than to go the other direction. If you build a slide and then record your voiceover, you don't get to see your slide happening in real time. So if you're trying to line up what you're saying with things that are happening on the screen, it's going to be nearly impossible. And what you'll have to do then is after you've recorded, you'll have to go back and readjust the timings on all your stuff. So make your job a little easier, record the voiceover first, then you can play the slide and you will hear the voiceover happening and you can see where things happen so that you can time events out. So that's just a suggestion, is if you're going to do voiceover first, then add the content in. If they need to sync, if it's just a generic slide of stuff happening and sort of a generic voiceover and they don't need to sync with each other, it's not as much of an issue there. But if you're trying to line up events, visual events and audio events. In terms of deciding to go entire Powtoon or current slide, I don't really have a this way is better. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. If you record the entire Powtoon, then the advantage is that you get a much more consistent result, usually in terms of the voice from slide to slide to slide. because you're recording it all at the same time. You've got the same, you know, issues with whatever space you're recording in. They're always going to be the same. You're the same distance from your microphone. You're probably talking the same way at the same volume. And if there are, especially if there is a little bit of noise in the background, that noise will at least be consistent. If you record slide to slide, then you do run the risk of things, you know, at the end of a slide, the sound will stop completely. So if there's a little noise in the background, people will hear that noise go away completely. And then when the next slide starts, that sound will start again. And sometimes that can actually be more distracting than just having the sound in the background all the time. You know, if you've got a fan or a hiss or a hum or something. And also, obviously, you do run the risk of, if you're in a different position to your microphone, or you do some slides one day and then you come back a couple days later and record a couple more slides and you have a bit of a cold, then your voice is going to sound different on those slides than it did on the first ones. So for continuity's sake, it's better to go the full one. But what you lose there is some flexibility in timing, because if you're doing a whole Powtoon voiceover, you've kind of now already said, here's how long it's got to be, here's where everything has to happen. So if you want to go back and say, well, this slide really needs to be 3 seconds longer, you don't really have a way then of going back retroactively and saying, well, let's add 3 seconds in the middle of this voiceover track, because it can only be the one track all the way through. So which one is better? It's kind of going to be up to you and your workflow and, you know, what you need to do. Just realize, if you go the full voiceover route, you may lose some editing flexibility down the road, but you're going to gain some continuity. If you go the individual slide route, you've got more flexibility in terms of timing and editing, but you may be losing out on the continuity side of things. So maybe just be aware of those two. If you're going to go slide by slide, just do whatever you can to make sure you're as consistent as possible. You know, maybe record all of your slide voiceovers first. Like, just throw in 10 slides, all dummy slides, and record the voiceover on each. So then you've got them all done all at the same time, and then you can go back and adding content. I mean, there's ways to address both ways. So neither one of them is the right way to do it. They're both options for you. All right?
Here's one question.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do the add voiceover for the entire Powtoon, like, what's the time restriction there?
I don't know that they're
The slide is 20 seconds, right?
right. I don't think they give you. There's no real time restriction, because a Powtoon. I don't think there's an overall length restriction. I've never seen Powtoon say Powtoons can only be up to 10 minutes long or something like that. So, and there's nothing showing up here. So my guess is you could just keep going and going and going.
And if you try to do the whole route and then you realize for whatever reason you need to swap it out, can you change the voiceover after you've made the slide? Like, change that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can swap that track out at any time.
Okay.
If you've gone to all the work to time everything out and the new one you do doesn't follow the exact same timing, you may have to go back and make more adjustments. And you know, the other, if you've, say, got any experience with Audacity or with a recording program like that, you might find it, because you really can't edit this. Once you've created it, it is what it is. So you might find it easier or better, because then you could record it, and if you have some ums or uhs in there, you could go in and edit those out and kind of clean it up before you load it into your Powtoon. But that gets into a whole additional layer of production, which, you know, is what it is. Okay, so that's basically it for sound. Each of those elements does have its own volume control. You can't automate the volume, so you can't have something get louder and then get softer as it goes through. I would have liked to have something like that, because maybe on some slides you want to have the sound be the only thing and you want it a little louder, and other slides you want it to duck down, but again, it's just a limitation. So any questions on sound? So the final thing, honestly, is the easiest of the night, and I saved it for the end because I know everyone gets that glazed look at about this time of night, and that is transitions. And this really is, if you can do transitions in PowerPoint or any of the other program like that, it's exactly the same. The moment you've got more than one slide in your show, you get a little icon in between the slides. And if you drift over it, it even says add transition. When you click on that, it's going to give you the library of transitions to choose from. They've got them grouped into 3 or 4 different categories. If you drift over one, it will give you a preview of what that transition looks like. So you pick one, and now it sticks that transition in between those slides. From our experiences last week, if you remember my saying, one of the, to borrow Dr. Bed's terms, one of the deadly sins in doing video and things like this is the using every transition in the book in your project, right? So if you're going to choose to use transitions, and you don't have to, you know, if you watch movies a lot, which I do, the most common transition in a movie is just the jump cut, right? Just straight, here's the last frame of that shot, and the next frame is the first frame of the next shot. There's no transitional moment at all. But if you decide you want to use transitions for a reason, pick one or maybe two. And if you're going to pick more than one, they should relate to each other. Like do a slide left and a slide right. Don't do a slide left and a squeegee. And then stick with those. Yeah, right in between the two slides. There you go. And that's just a design thing, right? Your slideshow, your movie should not be about the transitions. The minute you have somebody going, oh, I wonder what transition they're going to use next, you've lost them. They're no longer paying attention to the content of your video. They are looking to see which transition you plan on using next. So if you decide to use them, that's fine, but just be deliberate and judicious in your use of them. All right? That, honestly, guys, is basically it when it comes to Powtoon. There's very little that we haven't touched on in one way or another. We've made our way around the whole interface. You know, the stuff across the top, the grid, the aspect ratio, resizing it so you get that workspace outside. We've gone through all these content area collections. The one I didn't mention specifically is specials. There's nothing special about the specials. Those objects are grouped sort of by event type. You know, that's the categories are like social things, events, holidays. It's just content that they've grouped differently. So we've gone through all of that content. We've now explored the timeline in a fair amount of detail. We've explored the sound control panel and sound elements in detail. You've got your basic slide setup and the transitions between slides. And that's kind of everything that Powtoon gives you. So the challenge then is just to use it all to get the result that you want to get for whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So questions? Okay. I was trying to incorporate wait time because one of the videos last week, remember, how important wait time is. I was gonna put on my little witch hat and all of that, but
There's a lot of homework to explain, so that's why I was like, oh,
yeah. So
questions on that.
all right, so yeah, so let's finish up by just sort of talking about homework. So it's essentially the main bulk of this week is kind of a mirror image of last week. The reading portion of it, the forum portion of it, is a little bit more involved this week than last week, but I don't think a huge amount. We have another little mini project, but that's really on the same scope of what we worked on last week. You could even build off of what you did last week if you wanted to. And then the last thing actually is not so much a forum, but more is taking a first step towards deciding what our groupings are going to be for our game project. So that's kind of outside the scope of course content. So teaching concepts. This is a 3-part thing. Number one, there is an attached article. This is an approach. I'm not trying to say this is the only approach. This is an approach to teaching concepts in an e-learning environment. So they are coming from that particular perspective. And what they do is break it down into kind of 3 phases. And then the article kind of goes through and describes those 3 phases. So this is teaching concepts. So the first step is simply to just read through the article and kind of reflect on it a bit. Piece number 2 then, and this is kind of by way of just getting you to use some different e-learning tools in some different ways. So rather than just doing a straight forum this week, I have created a glossary activity. And for some of those of you that are in the other class, this is kind of along the lines of what we also included in this past week's class. But what I'm asking each of you to do is to think about 2 concepts. If you are in a classroom, maybe there are concepts that you teach in your class. If you are not in a classroom or not teaching, not a big deal. Just think of 2 concepts that you would want to teach or want to teach to somebody, not even in a class setting. It could be just something at home. And what you're going to do is create an entry in this glossary for those concepts. And these entries are meant to be short and sweet. We're not looking for, dissertations here. So whatever the name of the concept is, when you add the entry, it's going to ask for, a name. Just give that the name of the concept. So it could be order of operations. I know that's a concept. So then just these 3 things then, define and examples and analogy, those are all directly out of the reading. So kind of taking that person's approach to the teaching of concepts, you're going to deliver a definition of your concept. You are going to come up with an example and a non-example at least of your concept. And that'll be clearer once you've read the article. And then an analogy that you might use in teaching the concept. And again, in the article, they give some examples of what that looks like and what that means. So what we will end up with, hopefully by next week, is a bunch of entries here, all alphabetized by concept, that anybody in the class can kind of look through and sort of see what people came up with. So we will probably end up with some math concepts in here. We'll probably end up with some cooking concepts in here, maybe some Spanish concepts in here, or some Chinese concepts in here. But just sort of a collection, a way for you to just kind of quickly think through, here's a concept that I would like to teach, or I do teach, or I might teach, or I might have to explain to somebody. It could be how a carburetor works, I don't know. And just applying the article's 3-step approach to that. All right, does that make sense? So there's no replying to these. This isn't a forum. It's just you're creating a little glossary entry. The third piece of it then is a more traditional forum then. After having gone through that and thinking about a concept in those 3 things, just kind of what are your thoughts about that approach? Do you think the approach is useful? Do you think it's not useful? Do you think it misses something that you think is important to teaching concepts? And again, develop these conversations. I have to say, you guys, both of my classes this year are doing a tremendous job about getting those conversations going. I think I've got more posts and cross posts and replies to posts going than I've ever had. So thank you all for that. So this is then after you've done the glossary activity, which again should not take you very long. This is the reflective piece of that. And then this is where we can get some discussions going. But again, any of you can look at the glossary at any time, see what other people posted, see what other people are coming up with in terms of examples and counterexamples and analogies and stuff like that. So that is part 1. So that's the analogous part to last week's question about teaching facts. Then the other piece of the homework is Powtoon, and I'm calling it another Powtoon mini project. Take one of those entries that you made. Why not reuse work that you've already done rather than starting from scratch? And try to turn those three pieces of information, the definition, the examples and counterexamples, and the analogy, into a short little pow tune. All right, so take whatever that is. I'm saying add animation, sound, and transitions as you wish. Again, these are not about me giving you a specific set of things that you must accomplish. You've all seen what Powtoon can do. So use whatever pieces of it you feel comfortable using or you think will best support what you're doing. And again, my point of that is to reinforce your thinking about concepts, but also as you're working in Powtoon to give you an instructional focal point where you're trying to achieve something specific in a slide as opposed to just throwing random firefighters onto the scene. So that's really part two. Title it Mini Project 2. Do share it with me now that you know how to do that. That takes, 3 seconds to do that. You don't have to share it to me until you've gotten comfortable enough with it that you feel it's shareable. And then the last piece is starting to think about our gaming projects. So I've done this as a forum because it does, I think, involve some discussion. So what I want each of you to do is to think about 3 topics for a game that you think might be interesting to develop as a game, right? You're just throwing some ideas out there. They don't have to be something that you teach. It could really be drawn from anything in your experience or whatnot. So what I want you to do is, your job is just going to be to post 3 suggestions for games that or topics for games you think you might be interested in developing. As other people post theirs, take a look at other people's ideas. What I'm hoping that we start to find is that some people in the class are thinking along similar lines in terms of a topic or a subject, or at least a subject area. So if we can create groups where the people coming into that group already have some thoughts along similar lines, I think that'll help those groups kind of get moving. Obviously, I don't know that we're going to find 3 topics where it's going to divide evenly down, where everybody was exactly on board with the same topic. There's going to be some give and take and some discussion of where you actually end up as a group. But this seems to be a good place to start, to at least get an idea of, here are some people that might work together well as a group because they're all kind of thinking about similar topics. So initially, all you have to do is post your 3. Just throw out, here are 3 things I might be interested in doing a game about. Then the replies would be along the lines of, hey, I really kind of liked your idea for doing a game about add, subtract, divide, and multiply. I had a similar idea too. And as I read through those, I'll start to get a sense of where people are starting to connect with each other. So even if you see somebody else's idea and it wasn't one of yours, feel free to say, hey, that wasn't one of my ideas, but that sounds like a really fun thing to do as a game. I'd be on board for that, just so this way we can have kind of a discussion, and I can look in on that discussion and start to get a sense of where it looks like people are. All right. What I think will happen, and I've got one wild card going. It sounds like most of you know Mike from other classes. He just wasn't able to work out attending this class because of his job constraints. And so he is in the class. He's just not physically coming to campus for class on most weeks. I still need to finish up a discussion with him about the game project, because I could go 2 ways. We could either take the 8 of you and have you divide up into groups, and then he kind of figures out a project on his own to work on, or we figure out a way to incorporate him into one of the groups here. That obviously has some challenges, because if he's not physically here, then nights where that group's having discussions, how do they include him in the discussion and so on. So I'm not completely settled on that, but I do think as a class, we will probably be looking at 3, maybe 2 groups. If he's in the mix, definitely 3. It would be 3 groups of 3.
The group projects obviously meet here. Sorry to interrupt.
For part of it, yeah. I mean, what will start to happen is on many weeks, we'll have some instructional bit we do for the first part of class, And then I'll say, okay, the remainder of class is for you to get together with your group and work on this next piece of the project. So it's not necessarily that you will be doing physical things with your game during those times, but they're good times to have discussions and strategizing about, okay, well, this week you should be working on this, and this week you should be working on that. So, but if it's the 8 of us, I don't think I want to go, because that would end up having to be 3, 3, and 2. And I think 2 people is a little too small to do a game project, unless there's 2 people who really just want to hash it out with the 2 of them. So if it's the 8 of us, I would probably end up going 4 and 4. So it'll be one of those 2 arrangements once I've kind of finished hashing out my own thoughts. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of sizes of groups. So as I look through these posts, what I generally do is make up a little spreadsheet for myself of what everybody's suggestions were and who replied to other people's suggestions, and start to draw lines and try to group people together that way. So that's the last piece of homework for next week. We won't have the groups decided by next week. It'll probably still take me even another week past that to really kind of nail all that down. But by next week, at least everybody should have posted something, so I start to get a sense of where people are going. Last year, we did have a group do a game that was basically the basic add, subtract, multiply, divide. They were working at an elementary level. We had one group that did a game about Greek mythology that was geared more towards high school students, and it was kind of if you guys have ever seen Hollywood Squares, it was kind of that sort of a thing where there was a grid of people who had to answer questions that were being posed, and they would either get X's or O's. And the other game was a nutrition game that was sort of more of a board card game sort of a thing where you go around and you had to make healthy choices for food, and you had a certain bank of calories that you could use up or things like that. So the topics can be all age levels, they can be all types of subject areas. It just should be something that is going to be fun for you to engage with and give you an opportunity to be creative and explore what gaming can be. So those are the 3 parts. So yes, I will say it is a little more work than last week. That first piece is broken out into a couple of sub-steps, which last week's was not. But I'm still trying to kind of keep an eye on the overall workload and try to keep it manageable. And if you don't have the second Powtoon finished by next week's class, it's not the end of the world. It's mainly about you practicing using Powtoon. Next week, we will talk about the official Powtoon project, because at that point, I think you'll have a good enough sense of what the program can do that you can really start to think about what you actually want to do for your real Powtoon. And we'll go over that next week. So, all right, questions, concerns? I've got to come up with another letter. I always end up with all these C words: comments, criticisms, concerns. I've got to come up with some other alliterative series of words to use. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good week. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you ever see us going down the wrong road, like before you get too far into the project.
Oh yeah,
you'll be like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you think you're doing an awesome job, but
Yeah.
stop.
No, there's
That was one
continue.
of the things Dr. Crochet said. He's like, I won't let you get too far down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
No. That's
We were halfway together.
that's having the live sharing of the Powtoons, for example, is a great tool for a teacher. And like the audio programs I use at school, it's the same way. I can check in on a student's project at any point.
Yeah.
And that way, even if they're not aware I'm doing it, I can check in. And if I see, oh man, they're like way off base on this, I better have a discussion with them right now. So that is one thing I like.
We think we're awesome in our own mind.
Oh, you guys are.
We're the opposite.
I mean, you
Then
are.
we're like, then somebody's like, oh girl, no.
All right, thanks
Thank
guys.
you.
We'll see you next week.